Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we read about the crucifixion of Christ. And in the Gospels, we have kind of a third person account of the crucifixion of Christ. And we just get really the facts of the crucifixion and not necessarily a first person viewpoint on the crucifixion. But fortunately, in the Old Testament, we have several passages that kind of help us to see things from Jesus's perspective and to see what was going on through his mind. What were some of the things that he was thinking? What were some things that he was doing that was helping him endure the crucifixion on the cross? And Isaiah 50 is one of those passages. Here in Isaiah 40, it talks about Jesus's response to the trials. It might be more focusing on, but this would also apply on through the crucifixion. But nonetheless, here we see how it is that Jesus endured such immense suffering, going through the trials, and they're spitting on him and slapping him, plucking out his beard. They're insulting him. He's led to the praetorium, and then these soldiers, this cohort of soldiers, begin to mock him and beat him. And then he's led away to Golgotha and pierced his hands. They pierced his hands and his feet and experienced that excruciating pain of the cross. How is it that Jesus was able to endure those things? I think if we can understand how he was able to endure those things, perhaps it will help us to endure the things that we endure, which perhaps by comparison are a lot less than what he had to go through. So certainly if Jesus had these things in place to help him go through the immense suffering that he went through, maybe it'll help us in our day-to-day sufferings that we encounter. And so as you go to Isaiah 50, you get, again, a first-person view of what Jesus is thinking, how he's responding. It says in verse 5, "The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not disobedient, nor did I turn back. I gave my back to those who strike me, and my cheeks to those who pluck out the beard. I did not cover my face from humiliation and spitting." So in all the suffering that he endured, he didn't resist. And as we go to the historical accounts there in Matthew that we're reading today, but also in Mark, Luke, and John, we see that the Lord didn't really put up any resistance against the people who were coming at him, even though on a human level, he had every right to object, to make an appeal, to try to get out of this situation, but he didn't do so. He remained obedient. He knew that this was his Father's will. He had already prayed in the garden 3 times that if it was possible, that the Father would let this cup pass from him. But clearly, this was part of the Lord's will. He had to go through this in the fulfillment of the scriptures, but also in the fulfillment of God's plan. And so he obediently gave his back to be struck. He gave his cheeks to be plucked with the beard, and his face for humiliation and spitting. How did he do that? We would want to know. How is it that he endured these things without raising a hand in objection? Well, verse 7 tells us one of the things. It says, "For the Lord God helps me. Therefore I am not disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I will not be ashamed." One thing he knew is that God was going to help him. That even though he was enduring such horrific affliction and pain and suffering, that God was helping him. Now, it's not that God reached down and pulled him out of the situation. How was it that God was helping him? By giving him the inner strength to endure, by giving him endurance and patience through the suffering. But not only that, but he knew that the Lord was near. In verse 8, it says, "He who vindicates me is near. Who will contend with me? Let us stand up to each other. Who has a case against me? Let him draw near to me." So here he knew that the one who was going to vindicate him was near. And that because God the Father was near and that vindication belonged to him, that God was going to take care of the situation. These people might contend with him and raise a case against him, but ultimately he would come out ahead because his God, his Father, had the vindication and he was drawing near. And so he had confidence in God that God was going to vindicate him. And certainly that happened. 3 days later, he would be vindicated as he is resurrected from the dead. and shows himself to be triumphant over death and over the cross. And then he mentions again in verse 9, behold, the Lord God helps me. Who is he who condemns me? Behold, they will all wear out like a garment. The moth will eat them. So here's something else that he remembered. Not only was he God-focused, but in knowing that God was helping him, that God was going to vindicate him, but also he knew the true situation with man. He knew that these people who were coming up against him were going to wear out like a garment. The moth would eat them. They are temporary, and they could only do so much against him. They were in human flesh, and human flesh, as we all know, is temporary. It eventually wears out and goes away. But the God that he was trusting in, his Father, was eternal in comparison to them. And so he could put his trust in the Father, who is eternal, and not be intimidated by a man who is temporary. And then he goes on to say, for all of us, this is instructions that we could all take. In verse 10, who is among you that fears the Lord, that obeys the voice of his servant? Just like me, you hear the voice of the Lord and you're obedient to his servant, of course, being Jesus, that walks in darkness and has no light. Maybe you're the type of person who you fear the Lord, you're listening to his voice, you're obeying him, but you're in darkness. You're surrounded by darkness, and you just feel like there's no light in your life. He says, who is it that's experiencing this? Let him trust in the name of the Lord and rely on his God, which basically sums up everything that Jesus did in his sufferings. Let him trust in the name of the Lord and rely on his God. That's the secret to remaining obedient to the Father, being able to endure afflictions and trials and hardships by trusting in the Lord and relying on him. In verse 11, behold, all you who kindle a fire, who encircle yourselves with firebrands, walk in the light of your fire, and among the brands you have set ablaze. This you will have from my hand. You will lie down in torment. And so, again, just trusting in the Lord and knowing that God will help you through the trials, through the difficulties. And then also recognizing that all the things that we experience, where it's coming from the hand or the mouth of some individual, or it's just circumstances that we're dealing with, like with our finances or other things, whatever it is that is putting us through the fiery trial of suffering and hardship, we can trust in the Lord. He's going to outlast all these troubles. They're just temporary. And he is the one that will help us and strengthen us, either by getting us out of the situation or just giving us the inner strength to endure. And when we believe that, and when we know that, we can have confidence that he will get us through it. So let's, as we read about the account of Jesus' crucifixion in Matthew, let's also remember Isaiah 50. It helps us to know the attitude that Jesus had, not just the outward actions that he took, the outward things that he endured, but what was going on internally within him. And let's take these as an example for our own lives as we encounter trials and difficulties in this world on a day-to-day basis. So these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do a reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.